She watched him delete her mother's name from the screen, right there, right in front of her, and he didn't even bother to look up. Theodora Osi-Mensah had worked 41 years in healthcare administration. She had outlasted 4 hospital mergers, 2 recessions, and one very public malpractice scandal that took down an entire cardiology department. She had the kind of quiet authority that made residents straighten their spines when she walked into a room, not because she demanded it, but because she had earned it so completely that respect had become automatic. She was 62 years old, black, deliberate in everything she did, and she did not panic easily. But standing in the corridor outside Conference Room B on a Tuesday morning in March, watching through the narrow glass panel as her late mother's estate attorney scrolled through a document on his laptop and clicked delete, Theodora felt something she had not felt in a very long time. She felt the floor shift. The attorney's name was Prescott Ludlow. She had not chosen him. Her mother had. Loretta Beaumont Hale had trusted the man for 22 years, had sent him Christmas cards and a bottle of scotch every January, had called him the only lawyer who ever made me feel like a person and not a case file. Loretta had died 11 weeks ago. Pancreatic cancer, 7 weeks from diagnosis to the end. There had been no time to second-guess anything. The doctors, the hospice care, the will that Loretta had finalized in her hospital bed with a notary and 2 witnesses, and her daughter holding her hand. Theodora had not gone into that room, expecting to need to watch anything. She had come early, 15 minutes early, which was her habit, to drop off the certified death certificate Ludlow's office had requested. The receptionist wasn't at the desk. The corridor was empty, and the door to Conference Room B was not fully closed. She pushed it open 2 inches, just to announce herself. That's when she saw Ludlow's screen. And on it, her mother's will, and his cursor moving to a name, her name, Theodora Beaumont Osi-Mensah, listed as sole beneficiary of the primary estate, and the click, and then a different name appearing in its place. Conrad Hargrove. She did not walk in, not yet. She was 62 years old, and she had not survived 4 decades in institutional medicine by reacting before she understood. She stepped back from the door. She breathed. She thought about what she had just seen. Conrad Hargrove was Loretta's stepson, from Loretta's second marriage, which had lasted 6 years and ended badly. Conrad was 47, handsome in the way that men who've never been told no often are, and he had appeared at Loretta's bedside 3 weeks before she died. The first time Theodora had seen him in 9 years. He'd brought flowers. He'd cried loudly in the hallway. A nurse had offered him water. Theodora had watched all of it from the doorway and said nothing, because her mother had squeezed her hand and whispered, "Let him have his moment. It doesn't change anything." Her mother had been so certain. Theodora pressed her back against the corridor wall and looked at the ceiling. The fluorescent light above her had a slight flicker, the kind that maintenance kept putting off and no one ever fixed. She focused on that flicker for exactly 4 seconds. Then she took out her phone. She opened her camera. She walked back to the gap in the door, and she recorded 18 seconds of video. Ludlow at the table, the document on screen, and, just legible if you knew what you were looking for, the name Conrad Hargrove in the beneficiary field where her name had been. Then she walked to the end of the corridor, found a chair near the window, and sat down to wait for the meeting to begin. She had questions. She needed answers to exactly 3 of them before she could do anything useful. First, was what she saw actually a change to the executed will, or was it working draft? Wills had multiple versions. Attorneys kept notes, comparisons, earlier iterations. It was possible, she made herself consider it seriously, that what she'd seen was Ludlow pulling up an old document, not altering the final one. She almost believed that. Almost. Second, was Conrad Hargrove going to walk through that door this morning? Third, who else knew? The receptionist appeared at 8:52 and offered Theodora coffee, which she accepted. At 9:01, Ludlow emerged from Conference Room B looking composed and buttoned up, the kind of man who'd spent so long performing competence that it had become indistinguishable from the real thing. He greeted her warmly, shook her hand, told her he was sorry again about Loretta. She was an extraordinary woman, he said. She was, Theodora agreed. At 9:04, the elevator opened and Conrad Hargrove walked out in a suit that cost more than some people's monthly rent. He nodded at Theodora with the practiced neutrality of a man who had rehearsed this moment. "Teddy," he said. He was the only person on earth who called her that, and she had never given him permission. She nodded back, said nothing. At 9:07, they all sat down in conference room B. Ludlow opened his laptop. He produced a printed copy of the will, the executed version, he said, the one Loretta had signed in the hospital. He slid one copy across the table to Theodora and one to Conrad. Theodora looked at her copy. Her name was in the beneficiary line, sole heir to the primary estate, the house on Clearwater Drive, the investment accounts, the art collection, everything. She looked at Conrad's copy. His face was absolutely still. She looked at Ludlow. He was looking at his laptop, she thought. He printed two different versions. Here is what Theodora Mensa knew about documents. She had spent 4 decades managing the administrative infrastructure of hospitals. She understood how records worked, how version control failed, how easily a timestamp could be manipulated if you knew what you were doing and no one was paying close attention. She had, over the years, helped legal teams untangle 3 cases of fraudulent medical records, 2 of which had resulted in criminal charges. She was not a lawyer, but she understood paper in a way that most people did not. She looked at the printed copy in front of her. The formatting was slightly different from the will she'd reviewed with her 6 months ago. The margins, the line spacing, almost imperceptibly altered. The signature block looked correct, the notary stamp looked correct, but the date on the document control footer, the small print at the very bottom of the last page, the kind of thing most people never read, said it had been printed that morning, at 8:43 a.m. 17 minutes before Theodora had arrived. She folded her hands on the table. She looked at Ludlow. "Before we begin," she said, "I'd like to request the digital file, the original executed version, with the creation and modification timestamps." Ludlow smiled. "Of course, that's standard practice. I'll have my office send it over this week. I'd like it now," she said. "From your laptop, screen shared to both of us." The room was very quiet. Conrad shifted in his chair. It was a small movement, barely perceptible, but Theodora had spent 40 years reading people in rooms where everyone was trying not to show what they knew. Ludlow said, "That's not typically how we conduct these sessions." "I understand," Theodora said, "and I'm not typically the kind of client who asks." She paused. "But my mother trusted you for 22 years, Mr. Ludlow, so I'm going to give you the opportunity to show me that trust was warranted." Another silence. The fluorescent light in this room was steady. No flicker here. Ludlow closed his laptop. "I think," he said carefully, "there may have been some confusion about the document versioning." "There's no confusion," Theodora said. She took out her phone and placed it on the table between them. "I arrived at 8:45. I came down this hallway." She pointed toward the glass panel in the door. "And I recorded a video." She pressed play. 18 seconds. Ludlow at the table. The screen. The name appearing. Conrad Hargrove was no longer still. His jaw had tightened in a way that made him look suddenly older, suddenly less rehearsed. Ludlow did not move. He stared at the phone until the video ended. Then he looked at Theodora. Then he looked at the table. "I think," Theodora said, "we should call the state bar." She did not enjoy the next 3 hours. She was clear-eyed about that later, when people, colleagues, her daughter, her oldest friend from Howard, who called her every Sunday, wanted to hear it as a triumphant story. It wasn't. It was exhausting and ugly, and at 2 points she had to excuse herself to the corridor to stand under the flickering light near the elevator and just breathe. What she discovered over the course of those 3 hours, with 2 investigators from the State Bar Association, and then a separate conversation with a probate attorney she'd called from the corridor, a woman named Abina Quarty, who happened to be the daughter of a colleague and who drove 40 minutes to get there, was this: Ludlow and Conrad had been in contact for 4 months. Since January, 6 weeks before Loretta died, there were emails. Conrad had been careful, but not careful enough. He'd used his personal account, not his business one, which meant it wasn't scrubbed by a corporate IT system. Ludlow had apparently believed that a digital amendment to the estate planning file paired with a quietly reprinted, executed will, would be sufficient, that the grieving daughter would simply accept the document. Sign where indicated. Move on. He had not counted on Theodora arriving 15 minutes early. He had not counted on the door being 2 inches open. And he had not counted on the fact that a woman who had spent 4 decades inside institutional bureaucracy would know exactly where to look and exactly what she was looking at when she found it. The effect? Ludlow's license was suspended pending investigation. Conrad was escorted from the building by the time the investigators arrived and said nothing that could later be used as anything other than evidence. The original executed will. The real one, time-stamped, notarized, backed up on the firm's server in a file that Ludlow had not thought to alter because he'd assumed the printed version would be sufficient, was located by Abenaquarti in 40 minutes. Sole beneficiary, Theodora Beaumont Mensa, as her mother had always intended. 3 weeks later, Theodora stood on the front porch of the house on Clearwater Drive. It was the house she'd grown up in. The porch where her mother had sat every Sunday morning with coffee and the newspaper, even in the years when the newspaper was getting thinner and thinner, and her mother was getting older and older. The hydrangeas in the front yard were coming back. Loretta had planted them the year Theodora finished her master's degree, and they had bloomed every spring since without interruption. Theodora sat down in her mother's chair. She had not yet decided what to do with the house. She was in no hurry. The house was paid off. Her mother had been meticulous about that. And there was time to sit with the decision. Her phone rang. It was her daughter calling from Atlanta. "How did it go with the attorney today?" her daughter asked. "The new one." "Fine," Theodora said. "Abina is excellent." "Thorough, Mom." A pause. "How are you?" Theodora looked at the hydrangeas. They were a deep blue this year, the color they got when the soil pH was exactly right, which it almost never was. Her mother had spent 30 years adjusting the soil pH until it was exactly right. "I'm okay," she said. And then, because her daughter was asking sincerely and deserved a sincere answer, "I'm angry. I'm going to be angry for a while. But I'm okay." "Good," her daughter said. After she hung up, Theodora sat for a long time in the quiet. Down the street, someone was mowing a lawn. A cardinal landed on the hydrangea bush and stayed there for a moment, considering, then flew off. She thought about her mother. Not the mother of the last 7 weeks, the hospice bed, the morphine's drip, the unbearable shrinking of a large life into a small room. She thought about the mother of the long years before that, the woman who had sat in this chair every Sunday, who had said let him have his moment, it doesn't change anything, and had been right, who had trusted the wrong man for 22 years, and somehow, through some grace or luck, or the specific providence that looks after stubborn women who plant hydrangeas in difficult soil, had raised a daughter who arrived 15 minutes early, and kept her phone charged, and knew what a document control footer was. Loretta had not known any of that would matter, but she had known her daughter, and that, in the end, had been enough.